Good afternoon. Welcome back to Preservation Connecticut series talking about preservation, our noontime chats about everything preservation. I'm Jane Montanaro, Executive Director of Preservation Connecticut, and I'm delighted to be your host today for our sixth program of 2022. Today we have the distinct pleasure of meeting with Lawana Holland Moore, Program Officer for the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I'm eager to turn the program over to Lawana, but before I do that, I'd like to quickly give you some information about Preservation Connecticut. Preservation Connecticut is the statewide private nonprofit historic preservation organization founded in 1975 by a special act of the Connecticut General Assembly as the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation to preserve, protect, and promote the buildings, sites, and landscapes that contribute to the vitality and heritage of Connecticut's communities. We are statutory partners with the Connecticut State Historic Preservation Office, and we are supported by our members, donors, and private foundations. And with broad support over the last 4 decades, we have successfully championed the protection of remarkable community assets all over the state by leveraging funding, advocating, forming partnerships, and promoting stewardship. Our office is on Whitney Avenue in Hamden, Connecticut. Shown here, it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it's the Eli Whitney Boarding House, built in 1827 to house workers for Eli Whitney's rifle factory, and it's served as Preservation Connecticut's headquarters since 1989. We have a staff of 9 preservation professionals and an active board of 21 preservationists from around the state. Staff listed here are always at the ready to assist with inquiries. Christopher Wiegren is our Deputy Director. Contact Chris for information on historic preservation easements, our acclaimed bi-monthly magazine, Connecticut Preservation News, our newly launched Olmsted in Connecticut Landscape Survey Project, or to arrange a book talk for his recently published book, Connecticut Architecture, Stories of 100 Places. Renee Trubert, Making Places and Preservation Services Manager. Please contact Renee for information on redevelopment of historic industrial sites and historic tax credit applications. Jordan Sorensen is our Development and Special Projects Manager. Jordan manages our communications and outreach to members through social media and email, receives and monitors demolition notices from municipalities, and prepares historic tax credit applications and nominations to the State and National Register of Historic Places. Kristin Hopewood is our development assistant, and she manages all of the inquiries that come through our websites, provides member services, arranges special events, and is the editor of our Historic Properties Exchange, a free listing of threatened historic properties. And finally, our team of circuit riders, Brad Scheid, Mike Farino, Stacy Vero, new to the team, Stefan Danchuk. Our circuit riders provide immediate response to homeowners, developers, municipal leaders, nonprofit organizations and museums, historic district commissions, and more, with an array of preservation technical assistance, including community organizing, prioritizing maintenance and repairs, historic designations, and funding. These weekly chats have served as a meaningful way for us to continue our mission during the pandemic. We've been able to connect with the public and hear what's on your mind, providing more than 40 programs and reaching an audience of about 1,000. During today's program, please feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions directly at the end of the presentation, or of course, contact us afterwards for a call or a site visit. A reminder that all of our Talking About Preservation programs are available for viewing on our YouTube channel, which you can find at preservationct.org on the homepage. Just click on the YouTube icon at the bottom of the page and let us know what you'd like to hear about next in our spring series. We are starting to book speakers for that. So now I'm very, very excited to stop sharing my screen and turn the program over to Lawana. Lawana, welcome.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead and share my screen with everyone. Okay, all right. Hello everyone. I am Lawana Holland Moore, Program Officer of the National Trust for Historic Preservation's African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. It is my pleasure to talk to you about the Action Fund and the National Trust's efforts to tell the untold stories of our shared American history. The African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund is the National Trust for Historic Preservation's multi-year, now $70 million initiative, committed to crafting a narrative that expands our view of history by telling the full story of African American historic sites and promote a national identity that reflects the nation's true diversity. The Action Fund is the largest preservation effort ever undertaken in support of African American historic sites. African American history is American history, and by elevating those stories and places, we look to not only understand our past, but to also create opportunities for dialogue and to form stronger arguments for how to link preservation to the honoring of our ancestors and the honoring of ourselves. We keep places alive through collaboration with and the dedication and perseverance of grassroots advocates, preservationists, scholars, politicians, and the community itself to uncover and make visible these stories that contribute to our collective historical narrative as a nation. To be able to talk about the work of the Action Fund and its purpose is to ask the question that is often asked of me. Why is the preservation of African American historic sites and places important? When we speak of place, we speak of memory, of tangible connections. We can walk where they walked, touch what they touched, be where they were. Place allows us to inhabit a moment in time, connecting us to those through lines that link us to the past. But what happens when those moments in time have been obscured or omitted outright? What happens when those stories have not been heard? There's a gap, a hole that becomes our responsibility to discover and peel back those layers within a site to give us a more complete picture of place. Pictured here is Shockoe Bottom in Richmond, Virginia, once one of the largest slave trading markets in the United States, second only to New Orleans. This sacred place was paved over, a parking lot, its history overlooked and forgotten by so many. Through intervention and our support, this sacred space is not in danger anymore of becoming a stadium or anything else but a place to remember and reflect as a memorial park and site. I show you this slide to remind you of the climate that inspired the Action Fund's creation. Two of these images being of sacred spaces, a massacre of African American congregants at Mother Emanuel AME in Charleston, South Carolina, by a white supremacist in 2015. On the right, the vandalization of the African Meeting House in Nantucket in 2018. The African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund was created in 2017 in response to the events in the center image, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. These are hard, painful images to see, but in the face of such hate, the world needed to know our stories more than ever. We cannot shy away from telling stories that reflect and expose our complex past. We can draw from them and use them to create and shape a better future. The Action Fund has entered year 5 of our national grant program. We have hit and surpassed our original goal of $25 million, thanks to a $20 million gift from philanthropist Mackenzie Scott and her husband Dan Jewett, and another $20 million in funding from the Lilly Endowment for our Preserving Black Churches project. We are now a more than $70 million fund. We hope to continue to draw attention to the remarkable and still largely unrecognized and unheard collection of places and stories of African-American activism and achievement. America has been rich in history, but often poor in representing it, in funding the protection, conservation, and recognition of sites of marginalized communities. Since January 2018, we have vetted over 2,000 project proposals requesting over $190 million and have awarded $7.3 million to over 200 awardees and projects nationwide. Through our national grant program and involvement in initiatives such as our Historically Black Colleges and Universities Cultural Stewardship Initiative, in partnership with the National Endowment for the Humanities, we have been able to see and bring awareness to the breadth of African-American preservation need. It gives us a sense on a national scale of not only the need, but who is doing what are the interests, what are the concerns. The Black church has been the center of the African-American community. Its role as an anchor and compass essential to our experiences. They are the oldest institutions created and controlled by African Americans and have been central to who we were and are. Our newest initiative, the Preserving Black Churches Project, seeks to offer a national strategy for historic Black churches nationwide through a new national grant fund and assistance to churches serving as sites of conscience, memory, and reconciliation. Modeling innovative stewardship and capacity building for Alabama civil rights churches, and creating a rapid response and emergency grant fund for imminent threats. Its first recipient was St. James Church in Mayfield, Kentucky, which was almost destroyed during their recent devastating tornadoes. Another exciting project that I'm actually a project manager for is the Sojourner Truth Memorial Project in Akron, Ohio. With support from the Knight Foundation, we are collaborating with local Akron organizations and community stakeholders to create a brand new memorial on the site of her 1851 speech at the Akron Women's Conference, with a statue by noted African-American artist Woodrow Nash. We hope to create an innovative, thought-provoking space that will continue to inspire generations to come. Part of reclaiming history is the empowerment that comes with being able to actively support sites, organizations, and outward-facing projects that are working to make it happen. This means supporting projects and programming at our National Trust historic sites, such as the Woodrow Wilson House pictured here. Our preservation leadership trainings for organizations to learn best practices and strengthen their boards and their work. Our fellows, who are creatives, practitioners, and scholars, thinking about how to talk about preservation in new, innovative, and creative ways. We also funded the 2019 Preserving African American Places Equity Report that examined gentrification and displacement in historically Black neighborhoods nationwide. We also work with our National Trust Hope Crew, their hands-on preservation experience program that helps to encourage and inspire a new generation to train in the preservation trades. We also provide technical assistance for any site or the public to find out more about what they can do to preserve their historic sites. I love these calls and emails, and they can range from anything such as, how do I go about becoming designated? How do I get a marker or a plaque on my property, to I have a Rosenwald on my property. What do I do next? We also often do interventions to help save and protect African American historic sites and structures, such as the Brockway Center in Oklahoma City, pictured here. It is not enough to say that you want to make a difference. You must actually do it. Now I'm going to tell you the story of one of my favorite awardees and one of our first in 2018 that is located in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The Mary and Eliza Freeman Houses and its Center for Community and History tell the story of two free Black and Native American sisters who made shrewd real estate investments, becoming not just the wealthiest residents of the community of Little Liberia, but Bridgeport itself. At the time of Mary Freeman's death, the only Bridgeport resident who was wealthier was showman P.T. Barnum. Their circa 1848 wood frame homes are a testament to their legacy. On the left, Mary's is a double house, and Eliza's on the right is a duplex. The center was able to leverage their $50,000 Action Fund award into more than $1 million in funding. And for so many awardees, this has become not unusual. Awardees have told us that receiving an Action Fund grant from us has made others notice their project or site and listen when they were paid no attention to before. It has given them a seat at the table. One thing that I want you to take away is that African Americans are out there doing preservation work, from maintaining family and church cemeteries to contributing to building funds, fighting for recognition of historic rural schools for Black children, or Green Book sites that hosted performers and Black travelers during Jim Crow when they had nowhere else to stay. African Americans are doing preservation work even when they're not calling themselves preservationists. That is why it is so special, so important, and so necessary to do this work and to be able to acknowledge those efforts. There are so many stories out there to share, so many stories that contribute to the understanding of who we are as Americans, as a nation. And I leave you with a question to mull over, think about, and consider. What story needs to be heard today? If you would like to know more about the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund and how you too can help to tell the full story, please visit our website at savingplaces.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawana. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. That was a lot. I'm not sure where to even start with questions. Maybe I'd like to open it up to the audience to start the conversation. If you have a question you want to put in the chat, or if you want to ask Lawana, you go ahead and unmute yourself. John Deming, I see your hand.
What is the address of the two houses in Bridgeport?
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't sure if they look all run down like the photo or if they've been restored like the drawing.
They currently look like the first picture. They are in the process of restoring it. So the second image are the renderings for what they hope to be able to restore it to.
And do you know what the address is?
You know, I do not remember the specific address. Let's see.
Okay.
It's on Main Street.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Looking that up. Yeah, but we just put the website for the Freeman Center in the chat too. So I'm intrigued by all of your offerings, but I wasn't aware of the technical assistance
Yes.
that you provide. So how are you the one and only that people reach out to? Do you have a team?
Well, usually if it's an African, I've always joked that if it's an African American site, 9 times out of 10, you will get me. And, but that's fine. Usually what I do is I love hearing about what people's questions are, what you're trying to do, what your project or site is. And there are times I can easily answer the question myself, but for some that might be a little bit more complex or might need an intervention on our part, that's when I call in other colleagues and consult with them about it too. Like, hey, I have this project, this site, there's this property, this is what's going on, and we'll actually discuss it and in terms of what are the next steps to take.
Oh, Melanie Marks. Go ahead, Melanie.
Lawana.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine.
I'm actually calling from Connecticut, not South Carolina today, but I have a question for you. You know that we've submitted a grant for a walking tour in Bluffton.
Yes.
But I have a question. What kind of pertains to that? I'm currently working on developing the history of 9 newly freed slaves that were able to purchase the white Methodist Episcopal Church in 1878 for the church itself. It's now an AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church. And it's going to be in the walking tour, but I was just wondering when we've sent our letter of intent, and I was just curious when people will start hearing when things have been chosen or whatever.
Actually, we are in the process of, we're mid-evaluation right now, so we should be informing applicants if they are moving on to the next phase this month.
Okay, great. I have another question, if that's okay.
Oh, that's fine.
This pertains to Connecticut. There was an article in the paper at Westport regarding a gentleman, Benjamin Adair, who was Black, who had become the coachman for a very wealthy white bank financier in Westport and stayed with the family for a long time. My question in tinkering with him, I have nothing to do with that project, it's just I got curious, and you might not be able to answer it. He is in Connecticut in 1850. He was born in Charleston, which we know there was a large population of free Blacks that were able to maneuver around during that time. And I started to think, well, maybe that was how he made his way up to New York. But then I have him in the applying in the Freedmen's Bureau in 1873. And I'm still trying to understand if he was a free Black from Charleston, could he still apply for help through the Freedmen's Bureau? I know
well, my understanding is that he should have been able to, period, because it was the Freedmen's Bureau. So what you'll find is that, you know, upon emancipation, one of the stories I always hear about that is always special is the fact how many couples rushed to make sure their marriages were recorded with the Freedmen's Bureau. Yes. Yeah. So, you know, so very likely there's no reason why he wouldn't have been able to.
Regardless of whether we think he was one of the free Blacks that was moving through living in Charleston, which was a little more liberal, as opposed to being enslaved somewhere, and that's why he's applying.
Yes, sure.
Okay. No, you answered my question. I wasn't sure, and we're not, I mean, he was reported as being an enslaved person, but, you know, I don't know that, and I don't know where that information came from, so I just got curious.
And it's always tricky around that time period too, in terms of being able to verify. But one thing too is that if he was free, if we're talking about he was free before the 1870 census, which is when you first had African Americans listed by name across the board.
Right.
But see, the thing is that a lot of times if you were free, however, you were off. Sometimes I do a lot of genealogy work and work with records like that. And a lot of times you will find African free persons of color listed in census schedules.
And he's listed in New York City in the home of Morris Ketchum as a Black man, as his coachman. So I thought that was, that here he is listed with a name as opposed to just a sex and a number and an age.
And Freedmen's Bureau is such an amazing resource in terms of being able to find out that sort of information.
Right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Rodney Powell. I'm a member of Liberty Christian Center, former Horace Bushnell Church. And my pastor, Pastor Corey James, is also on this call along with another member of our church, Alice Turner. I've got a question, and it's really a fundamental question. Our church goes back to 1850, and then it was moved to its current site in the early 1900s, 1913. And it still exists. It was the United Church of Christ. It was a white church. And today it is a predominantly African, Caribbean, Black American church. Do the sites that you're looking at, do they have always been Black? Or okay, that's really my first question is, how long do you have to go back to declare?
No, it's not a matter of it needs to be originally that the congregation has always been. We understand that type of changeover in congregation so this is not an unusual story that a church that had been predominantly white may have been turned over to its African American congregation. So no, that would not keep you from being able to put in for anything because of that.
Okay.
Looking at now, the question is, well, also because of the fact too that you're saying the current church is from 1913. So has the congregation essentially been African American since then? It still wouldn't make a difference. It's still fine. The congregation is African American. Yeah. So it would be about preserving your structure itself that your active congregation is in. So,
well, the congregation has been African American since the early 1990s.
Okay.
And maybe even the late 80s. I'd have to go back and look, but when you look at all the pictures, the photographs we have, the congregation is predominantly, and the whole neighborhood had changed over time.
Mm-hmm.
We started out in the north end of Hartford as a Jewish neighborhood, and over the years became a Black neighborhood, and now we're Black Caribbean.
Well, I think it's a matter of your current congregation is African American. One of the things, for instance, if you're talking about the restoration of the structure itself, we're looking at the fact that your structure is historic. Okay. Your congregation is African American, so that's fine.
Right.
And I say this also because, for instance, one of our awardees last year, the church is predominantly white, but the church itself was built and designed. It was designed by noted African American architect Paul Williams.
Okay.
So you have this instance where the congregation is actually predominantly white, but its architect was Black. So it's not necessarily something that precludes you from being able to apply. Your congregation is African American. You're trying to preserve and save the structure you're in right now.
Okay. Yes. I have another question, and that is, you talked about this. I think you said 7 million. That was awarded to something like 200 recipients, which on average is about 35,000. Is that the average or 35,000? I'm just doing some really quick arithmetic.
It depends upon, we award our grants in 4 categories, which is capital projects. So it's our brick and mortar restoration, organizational capacity. So that's board building and strengthening, organizational trainings, project planning. So that provides for things like feasibility reports, historic structure reports, condition assessments, those type of planning documents. And of course, programming interpretation, being able to literally do that, exhibits and interpretation at your site. Each category varies. with capital project being the highest amount, going up to $150,000. So in all, the grants vary from $50,000 to $150,000.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
Lawana, when you make a grant award, does the recipient have to have all of the project matching funds, or are there matching funds required? Does all the money have to be in place?
It's one of the wonderful things about our grant is that we do not require matching funds. And I understand a lot of people are like, wait, really? But no, we don't. It goes along with the idea of intentionally also making the application process simple as well. Our letters of intent are simple because we understand that there might be that one person doing it all in the organization, or that you might not have someone on staff, or that one person who has development or grant writing experience. And we did not feel that a project or a site or an organization should not be able to apply for our grant just because they don't have grant writing experience or haven't done this before. So it's the same type of thing. We also recognize that not having to do the match is such a great thing for a lot of organizations. What we do like to know is that you have support from the community or support from other type of funders as well. Even if it's just, you have local community leaders who've given $5,000, or the community is really rallying behind this project. We like knowing things like that.
And this grant is then a wonderful opportunity to be the match for some other program that requires a match, like similar planning grants or capital grants that the State Historic Preservation Office offers. This could be a good funding source for that.
One thing that we did for one of our, I believe, 2019 was, yes, 2019, the Preservation Resource Center of New Orleans. We gave them an award, and it helped to seed their micro grants program. What was happening was that in the Treme neighborhood was under, a lot of pressure being right next to the French Quarter, and due to like Airbnbs, and also that homeowners who have been there for generations were often getting fined and citations for repairs they were just unable to make to their home. So PRCNO used our award funding to seed their micro grant program to be able to give homeowners grants to make these repairs. And not only were they able to help homeowners make repairs, but they're also able to get a moratorium on those citations as well.
So I have a question.
Hello.
Hi, and I put it in the chat. Now, I was going to say, because grant applications usually require all sorts of background information, but now that's not necessarily true. I asked if there's an effort to put like the research that would have gone behind a grant or some of the church records into a collaborative place, either through your organization or through Connecticut Digital Archive, so that this can be found by other researchers. Because I know that there was a lot of research done during the on church records during women's suffrage movement. Centennial. And I don't know where any of that research got saved or produced. And, as a librarian, I like to point people to good collections of information. So that's my question is and I'm focusing on Connecticut, this is being collected either through your organization in a place that like a database that people can search, or if it's being uploaded to the Connecticut Digital Archive, the CTDA. And I'm gonna have to run in a minute, so.
Okay, on our end, we don't have necessarily a database that is searchable by the public. Of course, at this point, we have quite a good amount of data just across the board, able to look up sites and projects across the country just by state alone, or type of project, or region, or structure, or I tell people there are a lot of factors that go into our selection in the first place, and we can actually search by that, but we don't necessarily have a dedicated database in terms of searchable information for the public.
I have another question. Is your funding done in what I call funding tranches, so that you have a window of, say, March 31st, and then you look at those submissions, and then you'd have another one in, either 6 months or 12 months after that, or do you accept requests for funding throughout the year?
For our national grant program, traditionally our call for letters of intent has always been December 3rd. And usually what happens is that it's almost like this, it begins the evaluation process. So December 3rd is when they open. Traditionally, January 15th, around Martin Luther King's birthday, has always been our deadline. And once we've hit that deadline, that's when the evaluation process begins on our end. I like to joke that when December comes, I know my next 6 months are about to be really busy. So what happens is that we go through an evaluation whittling process, both internally, and we also have external reviewers from Harvard, ASALA, and other entities. The National Museum of African American History and Culture are also reviewers as well. And so we whittle it down and we get it down to the top 50, and they are invited to submit full applications, and they're notified in March. And once they submit their full applications, it begins another evaluation process, and we make our decision in June, and we announce the awardees in July, usually, lately, past 2 years, it's been mid-July. So it's pretty much almost a December to July from beginning to end for the process. And usually the awards themselves are for a year-long term, except for organizational capacity, which also funds positions. For instance, hiring a full-time position at director level, or transitioning a part-time worker to full-time. Those are over 2-year terms. So just to give you kind of an idea of the scope of the way it works.
So thank you for that. So on the year-long term, if it's a capital project, does that mean you have basically a year after the July award is made to get the work done, or how does that work?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
Even if whether it is a piece of a larger project, because sometimes we have a project that might be, let's say, a $1.5 million project, but we're funding 125,000 part of like phase 1. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I tell people is when you're submitting, I like knowing exactly, tell me exactly what you want us to fund, what you will be using the money for. Be very clear about that. Yep. So that, to me, that's one of the things that people love telling me the history of their site, but I need to know about the project as well. If I don't know what we're funding or what you're trying to do with our money, I don't know what to tell you.
Right.
So.
Okay. Thank you. Very helpful.
Lawana, we had a question submitted prior to the program today about Venture Smith. Venture Smith helped to clear the land on which our meeting house was built and may have shaped the beams used in construction. Mm. We don't have written receipts, but Venture and his wife were given burial plots in the adjacent church cemetery, now part of the Freedom Trail. How best to tell that story?
Mm. Well, to me, it sounds like multiple parts. You have the actual building where these beams are. So that's one part of the story. You have the cemetery itself, where they are, their resting place is another story. And it's a matter of the interpretation, talking about the fact that a lot of times there were African-American tradespersons, free or enslaved, that were working on these sites, building these sites. Tell his story. And you can also link it to this broader general story of African-American tradespersons as well. There's so many ways you can go with that. You can talk about the the community that he was in, what it was like when he was there, the circumstances that he came to be a tradesperson building these beams. There are so many directions in which you can go with the interpretation for that.
Well, thank you.
There's a organization called findagrave.com, which might help you. It's lists burials and people buried in cemeteries, often including information and photos of the gravestones, and in some cases even more information than that. So that might help.
Great, thank you, John.
Cemeteries are a great love of mine.
I have a question, if I may ask. My name is Joni DiMartino. I'm the museum curator of the Prudence Crandall Museum here. We're the site of the Canterbury Female Boarding School, a National Historic Landmark. And Lawana, thank you so much for your talk today. I appreciate getting like all this information. We did apply for a letter of intent because we're going through an extensive reinterpretation process where we're really studying more. We're going to be sharing more information about the lives of the students at the school who were African-American, and also what they went on to do, their legacy afterwards. We also have connections to Brown v. Ford, Dred Scott, and the 14th Amendment as well. So these are what we're going to be kind of featuring. I mentioned all of that to just kind of preface, and I'm sorry, I'm going to turn on this light so you can actually see me a little bit. There we go. Hi. But the reason I'm asking is I'm curious as to know what the process of the application would be if our letter of intent was accepted to move forward, because it seems like such a short window to really only have a month to pull all of that information together. So I'm wondering how the application would be different, what you might be looking for, because I was interested in the idea of phases for funding. So if you could just kind of talk a little bit about that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Well, one thing I'll tell you is that all applicants that make it to the top 50, the interesting thing is that you're actually paired up with a National Trust staffer, consider your technical assistance liaison, and they'll actually work with you in terms of helping you to get your application ready for submission. And the application itself, it's really, if you think of it, almost like giving us a bit more information than what's on the LOI. You'll go more in depth in terms of your project description. I like to tell people, you don't have to have a solid timeline down to the minutia of it, but it's where you tell us more about what you're really trying to do. It's where you tell us more about your budget. And I can tell you that I'm one of those types that I check your budget against what you're saying in your application. Okay. They have to match. They have to be clear. You have to let us know exactly what you're using it for. You would be, I say that only because you would be surprised at how many people do not. So the applications really expound upon that more. That's where you'll give us your letters of support. That's where you'll definitely give us more information in general about the project. So I tell people, it's like, think about it as the LOI is like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. And the application is like, this is exactly how we're trying to do it.
Okay.
Is there a standard form or a preferred method for the LOI, and excuse, and is the application available to be viewed? So you can kind of get to this young lady's point. It's kind of a short window. So if you will start pulling your information together as soon as possible, you would be.
Well, one thing about the LOI, as I said, that really is simple. It's 2 pages long. It's 2 pages long. A lot of it is general, just telling us like basic information about your organization and site. And I tell people that the main thing you need to pay attention to is that project description. And I tell people, think about it as this is your chance to sell us on your project or on your site. I've actually have helped organizations in terms of getting ready for their LOI before. It's a matter of tell us why your site why your organization is important in the work that you do. I love hearing about the history, but after that, tell us about the project itself. What are you trying to do here at your site? What are you trying to do for your organization, and why? You can also, within that, it's enough space within it to also tell us, do you have any support? What are your goals? What is your vision for your organization or site in terms of why you're doing this work? What do you want in the future for it? And if you kind of follow that, trust me, I love it like that. It works, it works, it works.
And there's no, there's no window for sending in the LOIs. Do you
the window for the LOI, as I said, it's essentially a month.
The LOI is from December 3rd to
yes.
Okay.
So you have a month and a half.
I got you. Okay.
And it's 2 pages.
I missed that. Okay.
Yes, it's 2 pages and really simple. And the application, I like to tell people that even if you don't make it through, that at least this is an exercise. Think of it as an exercise, that you now have really thought through this project. You now have all these things together in one place. So it can actually help you if you decide to apply for another grant. We at the National Trust offer other grants as well. I tell people you can send an email to our grants department at grants@savingplaces, all one word, .org. Because sometimes they have funds available that are very particular. There's even a fund that is specifically for rural places under a certain population. And it's across the board, general, any type of site, any type of project. So, and then of course there are revolving preservation funds, which are according to state. If we have enough in the fund for your state at that time, you have a good chance of possibly getting that award. So even if you don't get through for the Action Fund, because another thing I have to tell people is that the Action Fund grants are not just competitive, they are extremely competitive. And you can apply from year to year. I tell people, if you didn't make it this year, try again next year. We have had people who have put in almost every year and just made it maybe last year. So it happens, just, keep on putting in, because there's so many factors we are weighing when we are making this decision. You might be up against projects in your same town, your same city, your state, your region, same type of structure, same type of project. We also looking for geographic diversity as well. So somewhere from the West or New England actually stands out to us a lot, because so many of our submissions are from the Southeast. So, these are all considerations we're thinking about when we're doing this work in terms of the evaluations themselves.
That was very helpful. Thank you. I missed that. Thank you.
Lawana, under the Preserving Black Churches project, you mentioned an emergency response fund. Is that specifically for like a catastrophe response? Is that how you define emergency?
Yes. Our Preserving Black Churches project is extremely new. We just rolled it out, I believe, maybe 2 weeks ago. So we're still establishing our structure and how we want to do things, and our more formal awards in terms of the granting part of it probably wouldn't be until maybe late summer. But in terms of the emergency fund, yes, something that is disaster, it's in critical need. And I think those are things we'll be definitely defining more. And I think I had a question earlier that was asking me about, do we do more than just the grants in terms of funding? Sometimes there have been special cases that we've intervened and provided funding for, but as I said, special cases. But sometimes we've done that. And in the case of Preserving Black Churches, the emergency funding would fulfill that type of need.
Great, thank you. And we had a question submitted earlier. Can universities apply for grants?
Yes. Nonprofit organizations, universities, state, local institutions and entities such as local governments, state governments. It's not really, it's not just for instance, organizations, nonprofits. One thing I do tell people is that it does help to be a nonprofit. You can apply. When you first apply, you might not have your nonprofit status. You can be pending, but it has to be in place by the time of the award. And some people use fiscal sponsors. That's not really preferred, but you can. Oftentimes it's harder if you are a private owner, but that's something that we find across the board in this field. That's for so many private owners. Obtaining funding is often really difficult for their house or site.
Anyone else want to ask Lawana a question? I think we've gone through the chat questions and the ones that were submitted earlier.
I just had one thought on your last remarks, that if it was a private owner, but if they had certain easements in place, I know that usually applies to kind of preserving nature and stuff, but if there's easements for the building and so forth in place, is that a help for them to get assistance as a private owner?
Well, it just, so much of it depends upon what's going on, what they're trying to do, what's happening in terms of it being owned by, because we have other projects, for instance, where it's owned by a private owner, but it's almost like it works differently than a nonprofit in terms of ease of funding, ease of kind of knowing, okay, if we give you this money, this is what is really going to take place. I always say that dealing with private owners it's a little harder than dealing with nonprofits. Not impossible, but it is just so many stipulations and such that are different than working with nonprofit organizations or local and state entities.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Ms. Holland Moore, you can be contacted at savingplaces.org.
Yes, my email is lmoore, LMOORE, at savingplaces, all one word, .org.
Thank you.
We'll send a follow-up email to all of the attendees with a link to the presentation, Lawana's slide deck, and there's a lot of good information that was put in the chat. We'll capture all of those links and information and get that to you as well. So you'll have a record of how to reach Lawana and how to check out some of these other great resources. And of course, we'd like you to contact us and our circuit rider team. We can visit your site and help you navigate grant programs available at the state and get you in contact with Lawana and her wonderful programs. Well, this was fantastic, Lawana. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you again very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.